Amber Heard once stood at the center of one of the most watched legal battles in modern celebrity history. Now, years later, she's saying something unexpected. She no longer wants to use her voice. In a rare and quiet return to the conversation, Heard appears in a new documentary premiering at Sundance, where she reflects on how the 2022 defamation trial with Johnny Depp reshaped her life in ways that still linger today. Not as a courtroom recap, not as a rebuttal, but as a portrait of what comes after the headlines fade. "This is not about me," Heard says in the film. "I am not here to tell my story." And yet, the weight of what she doesn't say may be the most revealing part. After the verdict that ordered her to pay millions in damages, later reduced through a settlement, Heard stepped away from Hollywood almost entirely. She moved to Madrid with her young daughter, choosing distance over defense, privacy over visibility. For a long time, she disappeared from public life. But silence, as the documentary suggests, doesn't always mean peace. Heard describes the aftermath of the trial not as a single moment of loss, but as something more gradual, the erosion of her ability to speak freely, to participate without fear of distortion. She frames her experience as part of a broader pattern, one where public narratives grow louder than the people at their center. In the film, she references the UK libel case from years earlier, where a court ruled against Depp after he sued a British newspaper. For Heard, that ruling mattered, not just legally, but symbolically. It reinforced her belief that the truth can exist even when it's unpopular, even when it's costly. International human rights lawyer Jennifer Robinson, who worked with Heard during that period, appears in the documentary as well. Heard recalls immediately sensing that Robinson understood the larger implications of her situation, not as celebrity drama, but as a cultural signal. "What happened to me," Heard says, "is an amplified version of what many women experience." The documentary, titled Silenced, widens its lens beyond Heard. It also follows journalists and public figures from different countries, drawing parallels between their experiences and highlighting what the filmmakers describe as a global pattern. When women speak publicly about difficult experiences, the response is often not discussion, but discrediting. This framing is deliberate. The film avoids courtroom theatrics and instead focuses on the long tail of public scrutiny, the social media backlash, the reshaping of identity, the decision many make to retreat rather than continue explaining themselves. In late 2022, Heard settled the U.S. defamation case and released a carefully worded statement. She emphasized that the settlement was not an admission, and that there were no restrictions placed on her voice going forward. At the time, she described the process as an attempt to reclaim agency, to close a chapter she had tried to leave years earlier. Soon after, she relocated permanently to Spain. Fluent in Spanish, she built a quieter life centered on motherhood. In the years that followed, she welcomed twins, expanding the family she has said she worked for deliberately and thoughtfully, especially after facing fertility challenges. On social media, her presence has been minimal but intentional. Occasional photos, Mother's Day, holidays, a glimpse of daily life, without commentary, without explanations. And yet, Heard hasn't fully abandoned acting. In 2025, she returned to the stage in a theater production in the United States. Her first major acting role since her final film appearances in 2023. There was no press tour, no loud comeback narrative. Just a performance, and then a quiet goodbye marked by flowers and a brief note of gratitude to those who showed support. In Silenced, Heard doesn't ask for vindication. She doesn't re-argue the past. Instead, she raises a more uncomfortable question: what happens when speaking costs too much? When the price of participation becomes so high that withdrawal feels like survival? And whether, in a world driven by outrage and instant judgment, silence becomes not a defeat, but a strategy. Because if losing your voice means protecting your life, your children, and your future, what does it really mean to be heard? For Amber Heard, that question sits at the center of everything she's doing now, even the choice to step back into the spotlight at all. the documentary doesn't portray her as someone seeking redemption or approval. Instead, it presents a woman carefully renegotiating her relationship with visibility. Heard makes it clear that silence, for her, isn't about guilt or retreat, it's about control. After years of constant commentary, analysis, and reinterpretation by strangers, she describes a sense of exhaustion that goes deeper than public criticism. It's the fatigue of knowing that every word can be stripped of context, reframed, or turned into a symbol for someone else's argument. In that sense, Silenced isn't just about one legal case or one celebrity. It's about what happens when personal experiences become public property, and how difficult it is to reclaim authorship once that line is crossed. The film's director, Selena Miles, allows long pauses to remain uncut. Moments where Heard doesn't rush to clarify or justify. Those silences feel intentional, almost confrontational, as if daring the audience to sit with uncertainty rather than demand conclusions. And that may be the most unsettling part for viewers. There is no definitive ending here. No verdict reversal. No triumphant montage. Just the reality that some stories don't resolve cleanly, and that living with that ambiguity can be its own form of resilience. Heard's life in Spain reflects that shift. Removed from Hollywood's daily churn, she's focused on raising her children and building routines that aren't shaped by trending narratives. Friends have described her life abroad as deliberately ordinary: school schedules, family meals, quiet celebrations. Motherhood, she says, changed her understanding of strength. Not as something loud or defiant, but as something consistent and protective. Choosing when to speak. Choosing when not to. Even her return to acting followed that philosophy. Theater, unlike blockbuster films, is fleeting. No endless replay. No viral clips dissected frame by frame. You're present, or you miss it. For Heard, that impermanence mattered. When she thanked supporters at the end of the production, her message was brief. Gratitude without explanation. Appreciation without defense. It echoed the tone of her recent public appearances: fewer words, clearer boundaries. What Silenced ultimately suggests is not that speaking out is wrong, but that the cost of doing so is unevenly distributed. Some voices are amplified. Others are overwhelmed. And once a narrative hardens, even truth can struggle to breathe. Heard doesn't ask the audience to take sides. She asks something more subtle, and more difficult. To consider how quickly society demands testimony. How rarely it offers protection afterward. And how silence, in some cases, becomes the only remaining form of autonomy. As the documentary closes, there's no final declaration. No moral spelled out. Just a lingering idea. In a world that never stops talking about you, the most radical choice might be deciding when you no longer owe anyone your voice. If you want to understand how public narratives are built, broken, and survived, and what happens after the cameras move on, that conversation doesn't end here.